for putting up with our technological setup here. We're delighted to be starting the first discussion. I'm Jenny McGill. I'm on the faculty at SIPA, and I would just refer you to the bios for our speakers on this panel and the upcoming panel. So we are going to be moving quickly through a series of what I think will be really stimulating presentations, and then look forward to discussion with you. So I'm not going to take time to fill you in on the very impressive backgrounds of all of our panelists. I'll just refer to them first by name and give you also a brief outline of the topics that we're hoping to cover in the first session. And then I think we'll just start and we'll move through their presentations and then hopefully have time for discussion among the panelists as well as with you. As Yasmin Ergas mentioned at the beginning, the purpose of this conference is to look at some of these broader global challenges, transnational challenges to the achievement of gender equality and women's empowerment. And we thought we'd start with that sort of high-level perspective before we drill down into a few more critical issue areas. So on this panel, we're hoping to look at some of these broader economic and social policy issues and processes that will shape our, the future of the gender equality agenda in the years ahead, as well as some related financing issues. We need the money to make things happen as well. First I'm going to ask Professor Sakiko Fukuda-Parr from the New School to speak about gender considerations in the post-2015 process, drawing on the experience from the MDG process and some of the unintended consequences of global goal setting. Then I'm going to ask Radhika Balakrishnan, the Executive Director of the Center for Women's Global Leadership at Rutgers, to share a more critical gender and rights perspective on some of the key global economic issues that Dan Seymour mentioned in his remarks. Then we'll start focusing on some particular issue areas. I'm then going to ask Shauna Olney, who's the Director for Gender Equality and Diversity at the ILO, to share some of her recent work looking at issues related to gender, labor, and social protection, and in particular, the motherhood pay gap and related policy issues. Then we are going to shift gears and take a look at some financing issues and look in particular at one of the new sources of finance for sustainable development. Here I'm going to ask Liana Shalatek, who's the Associate Director at the Heinrich Böll Foundation in North America, to share work she's been doing on gender implications, opportunities, and risks related to the new Green Climate Fund. And finally, I think we need to also look at perspectives not just of policymakers, but also of civil society. And I'll ask Pat Morris, who's the president of Women Thrive Worldwide, to talk about the role of civil society networks and partnerships, such as the partnership that her organization, the Global Partnership Network that her organization is supporting with Southern partners. And we're going to have one or two of those partners joining us today. And this would be an advocating, again, for some fresh thinking and progress, greater accelerated progress toward gender equality. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Sakiko for her remarks.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this conference. And I have to start by actually apologizing because I'm going to have to leave early before the end of this the panel, because I have a meeting I have to get to by 11 o'clock at the New School, so I'll have to leave before we conclude. So my remarks relate to sort of, I guess I would call it a kind of a reality check on what we're all up to with this post-2015 agenda setting process. Dan Seymour reminded us that there's this post-2015 agenda setting process going on, and all of these things that we care about and the critical choices that we make in terms of priorities for economic policy are going to be realized, implemented in that sort of framework. But my message really is that it's that whole idea of setting goals, which is in fact a major problem to a human rights and human development approach to gender equality and to development. And we have to keep that in mind, the limitations of these goals. So I just read a press release released, I think, by Radhika, says that commenting that is a statement of the post-2015 Women's Coalition on feminist alternative approaches to sustainable development. And, you know, and this statement is emphasizing the fact that there's a certain level of dissatisfaction with current debates and proposals, and calling for a new framework that prioritizes people over profit, actively combats feminized poverty, redistributes unpaid care, and so on. I don't want to go into all of these details, but what I want to emphasize is that the dissatisfaction is what is missing in these frameworks that have been proposed, and that it says further on that deeply disturbed that as discussions at the UN on the post-2015 development agenda and CSW unfold, sexual and reproductive rights, health and rights are being erased and have been excluded from the conference's political declarations. And, you know, furthermore, you know, there's a sort of dismissing of the complexity of the realities of struggles. So what is really a problem with these frameworks, with these goals, is what is missing, not what is there, but what is missing. No one disagrees with what is there. What is the real challenge? The real controversy is over what is missing, what is excluded. And yet, there is this kind of euphoria about the success of the MDGs that seems to justify our trust in global goal setting as a great way of moving forward. And so someone like Andy Norton and Elizabeth Stewart, who are from the ODI, I mean, they are sympathetic persons whom we all know in the development community. You know, they state in a blog that one of the great successes of the MDGs was that they were brief. They fit on the back of a business card. One that could be slipped as readily into a pocket of a US aid official as that of an Indian farmer. Now, the whole point about the strength of the MDGs therefore was its brevity, that it was simple and short. Well, I think this is also a tremendous weakness of the whole idea of global goals. So this is a simple list that everybody could remember, you know. Because what is simplicity? It is also simplification and reductionism. So the strength of MDGs is simplicity, yet their great weakness is it is an extraordinary effort at reductionism of this complex thing called development and gender equality, gender empowerment. And so in the way that now, you know, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and in fact with Alicia Yeaman, we have had a research project involving 16 researchers in different countries looking carefully at 11 goals and targets and what they did. So our conclusions are that, you know, it may be a simple list, but even among the list of 8 goals, not all goals were equal. People did not pay attention to all of them. Certainly not all of the targets, nor indeed the 60 or so indicators. So, you know, there were many poor cousin targets like employment and food, hunger, partnership. There were all these off-the-table priorities that have even made it to the MDGs, like inequality, sexual and reproductive rights, literacy, employment, the whole 13-point Beijing agenda except for gender equality in education, in primary and secondary education, right? And so there were many off-the-table priorities in post-2015 agenda discussions as well. To start with, systemic injustices in the global economics system, corporate accountability, unpaid care, and so on and so forth. Then we have this whole idea that there has to be a framework of accountability, holding governments to account for making these commitments. Well, is it really reasonable to ask all governments to comply with a one-size-fits-all set of quantitative targets achieving the same level of quantitative of achievement, level of progress by the same start, regardless of where you started. Totally ignoring whether your poverty rate is 80% or 10% or 5%. I mean, it is ludicrous, in fact, if you think about it, to impose this one-size-fits-all Gosplan-like mega planning target and hold all governments equally responsible. I mean, I think it's kind of a peculiar leap of imagination that we got ourselves into. And then when we have the implementation monitoring, the MDG experience is that there's a great deal of selectivity. We have 60 indicators. Well, you know, the UN progress reports regularly report on 10, 20, maybe, you know, 25 indicators, not more. And the last chart that I saw looked at 16 targets and 16 indicators out of 21 targets and 60 indicators. And so what are the poor cousin indicators? Actually, some of the more interesting things. You know, to start with, the list, the MDG indicators list says right at the top, all indicators should be disaggregated by sex and urban, rural as far as possible. Well, I've never seen any monitoring report that actually reported on that at a global level. Another indicator that's really quite interesting, share of lowest quintile in national consumption. That's an inequality measure. So, I mean, this is very, very selective. So my point is that there are basically fundamental flaws in global goals as a tool for developing a consensus on international development priorities that should then be implemented and that should be used for holding governments accountable for making progress. And I think what we're doing is we're conflating the purpose of global goals. They are supposed to be a simple list of sort of rallying cries for political mobilization, for drawing attention to important priorities. It's a kind of a communications tool. But what we've done is we use this communications tool to become a framework for priority setting, for agenda setting. And then what this does is to frame, and the most dangerous thing out of this is that what it does is to frame discourse. It has framed a discourse of development as this very reduced, simplistic process of setting, of reaching these targets, and privileging a target-driven thinking about how you actually achieve development. In Beijing, everybody recognized that progress in gender empowerment was not going to happen by this reaching one single little target. It was going to require a multiplicity of investments, a multiplicity of changes in institutions. And but what this framing does, it prepares you to think in terms of a very simplified, reduced framework of development. And what framing is actually a political process that keeps out inconvenient, messy ideas out of the thought process, and the complexity of women's lives, the power structures that drive gender inequality, for example, and makes it this kind of a simple thing that you can fix easily with technological interventions. And so here's a little bit of self-publicity. Here is this book, MDGs, Capabilities in Human Rights, The Power of Numbers to Shape Agendas. Thank you very much.
Sakiko, thank you so much for starting us off on the right track, thinking critically about these issues. I'd like to turn it over to Radhika for another critical perspective.
Yeah, I think my comments will go very well with Sakiko's. Can you hear me? I can't. Yeah. So I think the comments I was going to make was really what we need to think about in this post-2015 agenda. I'm very happy that our vision statement's already being quoted the day after we released it. And it wasn't my vision statement, but it was a vision statement from the Post-2015 Women's Coalition, that the center is the global coordinator, but is made up of women's networks, feminist networks from around the world. And so it's a combined statement from all over the world. So just make sure that's not mine. But these are mine. And I think since the time of the MDGs, the global context has changed. We've seen the financial crisis, the world. I mean, look at what's going on in the world. And somehow we talk about new targets and goals without any consideration of the context in which we're trying to set these goals. And so one of the things that I always say is that we can't set these goals unless we look at the enabling environment that actually creates these issues, right? The MDG goals, you know, half extreme poverty by such and such a date. And you're supposed to do that by doing what? There's got to be some change in the kind of global context by which you can reduce these poverty. And now the 17 SDG goals and as an academic, but also an activist working on these goals, you end up sort of in the weeds thinking about each of these goals and how you're going to interpret them. And sometimes you need to step back and say, what is it that these goals and targets and all of these are supposed to achieve? So what I'd like to do in the few minutes that I have here is really